You'll ruin my Persian rug. I have no place for a homeless woman. That was what my son-in-law said as he blocked the doorway with one hand, the other resting casually on the polished wood frame, as if he were protecting something fragile. Behind him, the house was quiet. Too quiet. My daughter stood a few steps back, her eyes fixed on the floor, her arms folded tight across her chest. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I didn't ask where I was supposed to go. I nodded once, turned around, and walked back down the front steps. I'm glad you're here. Stay with me until the end and tell me where you're watching from. I want to know how far this story travels. The smoke from the wildfire still clung to my clothes. It had been less than 12 hours since the flames swallowed my farm. 42 acres. A small white house. A red barn my husband and I rebuilt board by board after a storm years ago. By sunrise, all of it was gone. Ash fell like gray snow. The air smelled sharp and bitter. I left with one canvas bag and the clothes I had slept in. Everything else stayed behind, turned to soot and silence. As I drove toward my daughter's house, I told myself one simple thing. Family doesn't let you sleep in your car. That belief had carried me for 70 years. Her house sat at the end of a quiet suburban street, with trimmed hedges and a green lawn that looked untouched by the chaos burning just miles away. When I parked, my tires left faint tracks on the driveway. I remember noticing that, how even the smallest marks seemed unwelcome there. I knocked once, softly. My son-in-law opened the door just enough to step out and close it behind him. He glanced at my bag, then at my boots, still dusted with ash. You'll ruin my Persian rug, he said, like he was commenting on the weather. I have no place for a homeless woman. The word homeless hung in the air. It didn't sound like it belonged to me. I had owned land longer than he'd been alive. I had paid property taxes when he was still in school. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was the rug. I looked past him, hoping my daughter would meet my eyes. She didn't. She shifted her weight once and stayed silent. That silence told me everything. I walked back to my car. My hands didn't shake. Not yet. I sat behind the wheel for a long moment, listening to the ticking of the engine as it cooled. The neighborhood was quiet. Sprinklers clicked on somewhere down the block. Everything I had left fit into that one bag on the passenger seat. I drove until the houses thinned and pulled into a small rest area near the highway. I sat on a bench, watching cars pass, their trunks full, their lives intact. I thought about calling a shelter. I thought about sleeping in the car. Then I thought of someone I hadn't spoken to in years. My late neighbor had a son, a quiet boy with scraped knees and two big shoes. His parents were rarely home. He ate more dinners at my table than his own. I taught him how to read maps, how to fix a fence, how to stand up straight when someone tried to make him feel small. When his family moved away, life carried us in different directions. We lost touch. But I never deleted his number. Nobody knew I still had it. I took out my phone and stared at the screen. My thumb hovered for a long second before I pressed call. The line rang once, then twice, and then someone answered. I sat there until the sky began to change color. The gray of the smoke thinned into a dull orange, then into the pale blue of early morning. Cars kept passing. Nobody noticed the old woman on the bench with a canvas bag at her feet. My phone stayed quiet after that call. No questions, no explanations, just silence. It gave me time to think. Less than a day earlier, my life had been ordinary. I woke up before sunrise, like I always did. The kettle whistled. The radio played low. Outside, the fields were dry from weeks without rain, but that wasn't unusual for summer. I had lived through droughts before. By mid-morning, the wind picked up. It came fast and hot, carrying a smell that didn't belong. Smoke doesn't ask permission. It seeps in. Through cracks, through memories. The fire moved faster than anyone expected. One moment it was a warning on the radio. The next it was visible from my back porch. A wall of orange rolling across land I knew by heart. I tried to save what I could. Papers. Photos. A small box of keepsakes from my husband. But when the sheriff knocked and told me to leave, I didn't argue. At my age, you learn the difference between courage and stubbornness. I drove away watching the rearview mirror until I couldn't anymore. That was when I decided to go to my daughter's house. I hadn't wanted to. Not really. Ever since she married him, things had changed. Visits got shorter. Conversations became careful. She used to ask my opinion. Now she asked his. Still, she was my daughter. I carried her for 9 months. I sat through fevers and broken hearts. I told myself none of that disappears because of a man and a nice house. I was wrong. Sitting at the rest area, I replayed the moment at her door. The way he said Persian rug, like it mattered more than the smoke still trapped in my hair. The way my daughter didn't say my name, didn't reach for my hand, didn't follow me outside. That silence hurt more than the words. As the sun climbed higher, the heat settled in. I checked my phone battery. 62%. Enough if I needed it. I thought about the farm, about the fence lines my husband and I walked every evening, about the kitchen window where I could see the entire field right up to the old oak tree. We had planted that tree the year our daughter left for college. Everything gone. People talk about losing a house like it's just walls and a roof. But land holds your footsteps, your routines, your life, layered year after year. When it burns, it takes more than wood. By late morning, I stood up and stretched my stiff legs. I couldn't sit there forever. I didn't know where I was going yet, but I knew one thing clearly. I wasn't going back to that front door. I walked back to my car and placed my bag on the seat again. The fabric was smudged with ash now. I didn't bother wiping it off. Some things don't need fixing right away. As I started the engine, my phone buzzed. A single text message. Stay where you are. No name, no explanation, just those 3 words. I looked out at the highway, then down at my hands on the steering wheel. For the first time since the fire started, something inside me loosened. I wasn't sure what would happen next, but I knew I wouldn't be facing it alone. I stayed in my car after reading that message. I didn't reply. I didn't ask questions. I simply turned off the engine and waited. Waiting was something I understood. I had done plenty of it over the years. Waiting for rain during dry summers, waiting for my husband to come home late from the fields, waiting for my daughter to call after she married and moved into a life that no longer seemed to include me. The rest area slowly filled with noise. Trucks pulling in, doors slamming. Someone laughing too loudly near the vending machines. Life moving forward, careless and intact. I thought again about my daughter. About the little girl who used to run barefoot through the grass, who cried when she scraped her knees and insisted only I could clean the wound. I remembered braiding her hair before school, the way she leaned back against me without thinking, trusting completely. That girl wouldn't have let a door close on her mother. Somewhere along the way, she learned to stand behind someone else instead. I wondered when it happened. Maybe it was gradual. A comment here, a correction there, the slow replacement of her voice with his. I had noticed it before, but I never named it. I didn't want to believe it. Now I didn't have to pretend. My phone buzzed again. This time it rang. I answered without speaking. I'm about 15 minutes out, a man's voice said. Calm, steady. Older than the boy I remembered, but unmistakable. Don't move. I'm not, I said. My voice surprised me. It didn't sound weak. It didn't sound desperate. Good, he replied. I'll handle the rest. The line went dead. I sat back and looked through the windshield. The heat shimmered above the pavement. In the distance, the sky was still faintly stained with smoke. The fire wasn't finished yet. It might never be. Not completely. As I waited, memories came in fragments. A small kitchen table. Extra plates set without question. A boy doing homework under the yellow light while my husband fixed something in the barn. I never thought of it as charity. It was just what you did when someone needed a place. I had never expected anything in return. A low, unfamiliar sound cut through the air. At first I thought it was thunder. Then the ground seemed to hum beneath my feet. Heads turned. Conversations stopped. I stepped out of the car slowly and looked up. The sound grew louder, deeper, pressing against my chest. Wind kicked up dust and loose paper. A shadow passed over the parking lot, large and deliberate. A helicopter descended toward the open field beyond the rest area. People stared. Someone pulled out a phone. Someone else backed away instinctively. I stood still. The helicopter settled onto the ground with controlled precision, flattening the grass beneath it. When the blades slowed, a man stepped out. Tall, confident, dressed simply without the need to prove anything. He looked around once, then his eyes found me. He walked toward me as if there were no crowd, no noise, no distance at all. When he reached me, he stopped and smiled. Not the kind meant for cameras, the kind meant for home. You didn't change your number, he said. No, I replied. Neither did you. He nodded, then turned slightly, positioning himself between me and the stairs around us. Let's go, he said. And just like that, for the first time since the fire, I didn't feel like I was standing in the ashes anymore. The helicopter lifted us away from the rest area without ceremony. No speeches. No explanations. Just movement. Forward. I watched the ground fall away beneath us. The highway turned into thin gray lines. Cars shrank into quiet dots, all moving somewhere important, somewhere warm, somewhere intact. I rested my hands in my lap and focused on my breathing. It had been a long time since anyone had taken control so gently. He sat across from me, steady, composed, as if this were an ordinary errand. Not a rescue, not a statement, just something that needed to be done. You shouldn't have been left there, he said after a while. Not angry, not loud, just factual. I was, I replied. He nodded, accepting it without argument. That was something I had always respected about him, even when he was young. He didn't waste time denying what was already true. We didn't talk much during the flight. We didn't need to. Silence can be comfortable when it isn't used as a weapon. As the helicopter moved south, I thought about how many times I had stayed quiet in my own life to keep peace. How often I had softened my words so others wouldn't feel uncomfortable. I had called it patience, loyalty, being a good mother. Now I saw it more clearly. Sometimes silence teaches people exactly how far they can go. We landed on a wide stretch of grass behind a modest guest house on the edge of town. Nothing flashy, no guards, just space, clean air, stillness. Inside, everything was simple. A small kitchen, a bedroom with fresh sheets, a bathroom with a stack of folded towels placed neatly on the counter. Someone had thought ahead. You can stay as long as you want, he said. No questions, no conditions. I set my bag down by the door. For the first time since the fire, I took off my shoes. My feet ached. I hadn't noticed until then. Thank you, I said. He smiled once. You don't owe me anything. That sentence stayed with me after he left. Later that evening, I stood by the window and watched the sun sink low, painting the sky in colors the fire never could. I thought of my daughter again, of the door that closed, of the way she didn't follow me outside. I wondered what she would think when she saw the helicopter footage later, when neighbors talked, when questions started forming that she couldn't answer with silence, but I didn't feel the urge to call her. Not yet. That night, I slept in a real bed. I slept deeply, without dreams of smoke or sirens. When I woke, the room was quiet and the air smelled clean. Morning light filtered through the curtains. I made myself coffee and sat at the small table, hands wrapped around the warm mug. The world hadn't fixed itself overnight. My farm was still gone. My family was still fractured, but something had shifted. For years, I had believed my place was wherever I was tolerated, wherever I didn't cause discomfort, wherever I stayed quiet enough to be allowed. That belief burned away with the farm. I finished my coffee and stood up slowly. There were decisions ahead, conversations that would come whether I wanted them or not. But for the first time, I understood this clearly. I was not homeless. I had simply outgrown the places that refused to shelter me. The phone rang just after noon. I knew who it was before I answered. I heard, my daughter said. Her voice was careful, measured, like she was choosing words the way one chooses glass ornaments. Slowly, afraid they might break. I didn't respond right away. I stood by the window, looking out at the quiet stretch of land beyond the guest house. No smoke, no sirens, just wind moving through tall grass. He landed a helicopter, she continued. People are talking. I turned back toward the room and sat down at the table. I rested the phone against my ear, listening to her breathe on the other end. Yes, I said. He did. There was a pause. Then, why didn't you tell me you knew him? I thought about that question, about how many things I had never told her, how often I had kept parts of my life small so hers could feel larger. You never asked, I replied. She exhaled sharply. Mom, you embarrassed us. Us, not him, not herself. Us. I stood at your door covered in ash, I said. My voice stayed even. You didn't speak. Another pause, longer this time. He was just stressed, she said. The fire, the house. You know how he is. I did know. I had seen that kind of man before. Men who mistake control for order. Men who think comfort is something you defend from others. I'm not calling to argue, she added quickly. I just want you to come back. We can talk this out. Come back. To the rug. To the silence. To standing behind someone else's comfort. No, I said. The words surprised her. I could hear it in the way her breath caught. No, she repeated. No, I said again. I'm not coming back. You can't just... She started, then stopped herself. Where are you going to go? I looked around the room. At the clean counter, the folded towels, the quiet. I'm already somewhere, I said. She didn't like that answer. I could tell. You always do this, she said softly. You always act like you don't need anyone. I closed my eyes for a moment. When I opened them, the light was steady. Clear. I needed you, I said. You weren't there. The line went quiet. I have to go, she finally said. After the call ended, I sat there longer than necessary. I let the silence settle without rushing to fill it. This silence wasn't sharp. It didn't push. It simply existed. That afternoon, I took a short walk along the edge of the property. The ground was dry but firm beneath my feet. I bent down and touched the soil, rubbing it between my fingers. It wasn't my land. Not yet. But it was solid. I thought about everything I had built and everything I had lost, about how easily people confuse ownership with worth. As the sun dipped lower, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't my daughter. It was a message with an address and a single line beneath it. Tomorrow morning. We'll talk options. I read it once. Then again. For years, my options had been limited by what others were willing to allow, by how quietly I could exist in their space. That time was over. I set the phone down and went inside as the sky darkened. Tomorrow would bring questions, attention, explanations people would demand. But tonight, I locked the door, turned off the light, and rested. Not because I was finished, but because I was finally standing on ground that didn't ask me to apologize for being there. The meeting was set for the next morning, but I woke before sunrise. Old habits don't disappear just because life changes. My body still knew how to greet the day early, even without fields to check or animals to feed. I dressed quietly and made coffee, the same way I had for decades. 1 cup. Black. Black. No sugar. Outside, the air was cool, clean. I stood on the small porch and watched the light creep across the land. For the first time since the fire, I wasn't watching for danger. I was simply watching. At 9 o'clock, a car pulled into the gravel drive. Not flashy, not loud. Practical. The kind of car driven by someone who didn't need to announce himself. The man from the helicopter stepped out, this time alone. No rush, no security. He greeted me with a nod, like this was a continuation of a conversation we had already started years ago. We sat at the small kitchen table, papers spread neatly between us, maps, photos, documents. He explained things slowly, without pressure. Options. Temporary housing, land opportunities farther north where the fire hadn't reached. I listened. At one point, he stopped and looked at me directly. What do you want? He asked. The question caught me off guard. For most of my life, I had answered versions of that question by thinking about others first. What my husband needed, what my daughter wanted, what would keep peace, what would avoid conflict. This time, I didn't rush. I want space, I said finally. Quiet, and land I can walk without asking permission. He smiled slightly. That can be done. We talked for over an hour. No contracts signed, no promises spoken aloud, just clarity forming, piece by piece. When he left, I stayed at the table and gathered the papers into a neat stack. My hands moved calmly, steadily. That afternoon, my daughter called again. I let it ring, then again. I let it go to voicemail. I wasn't punishing her. I wasn't playing games. I simply didn't owe anyone immediate access to me anymore. Later, I drove into town for groceries. It felt strange pushing a cart through clean aisles while my own kitchen no longer existed. I chose carefully. Nothing extravagant, just what I needed. At the checkout, the cashier looked at me and smiled. Rough week? She asked gently. Yes, I said. That fire was awful, she said. I'm glad you're safe. Safe. I realized then how rarely anyone had used that word with me in recent years. Safe had been replaced by useful, convenient, manageable. That evening, I cooked a simple meal and ate alone at the table. I didn't mind. Solitude felt different now. It wasn't loneliness. It was space. As night settled in, my phone buzzed with a message from my daughter. No apology, just a question. Are you coming for Thanksgiving? I stared at the screen for a long moment. I thought about the rug, the door, the word homeless. Then I typed a short reply. I'll let you know. I set the phone down and turned off the light. For the first time in a long while, the future didn't feel like something I had to squeeze myself into. It felt like something I could step toward, at my own pace, without asking anyone if I was allowed to be there. The days that followed settled into a quiet rhythm. Morning light, coffee, short walks along the edge of the property, conversations that stayed practical and brief. Nothing dramatic, nothing rushed. I learned that peace doesn't announce itself. It just shows up and stays, if you let it. By the third day, news of the fire and the helicopter had spread farther than I expected. People talk when something disrupts their sense of order. An old woman standing up without shouting tends to do that. My daughter didn't call again. Neither did her husband. I thought about him more than I wanted to. About the way he stood in that doorway, confident that he could decide who belonged and who didn't. Men like that don't expect consequences. They expect time to smooth things over. Time doesn't fix everything. That afternoon, the man who helped me came by again. No helicopter this time. Was he just the same quiet car and the same steady presence? "There's a property I want you to see," he said. "Nothing fancy, but it's solid." We drove north for about an hour. The road narrowed, the land opened up, trees replaced houses. The air felt different there. Cooler, less crowded. He pulled over near a stretch of land bordered by an old fence line. The gate creaked when he opened it. I stepped out of the car slowly and stood still, letting my eyes adjust. The land wasn't perfect. The grass was uneven, the soil dry but workable. There was a small structure at the far end, worn but standing. I walked without speaking, counted my steps, not because I had to, because I wanted to. "This used to be a working plot," he said from behind me. "Nothing big, but it held." I nodded. I could see it already. The paths I'd clear. The places where I'd sit when the sun went down. The way the wind would move across it, uninterrupted. "How much?" I asked. He named a number that made me pause. "I don't want charity," I said. He didn't flinch. "I know," he replied. "This isn't that." We stood there for a long moment, both of us looking out over the land. No pressure. No contracts pulled from a briefcase, just space to decide. On the drive back, my phone buzzed. A text from my daughter. "He's furious," it read. "You didn't have to do this." I read it twice. "Do I've?" I typed back one sentence. "I didn't do anything to him." She didn't respond. That evening, I sat alone again with my thoughts. I realized something then, something small but important. For the first time, my daughter was reacting to my choices instead of shaping them. That shift mattered. As night fell, I looked out at the darkening sky and felt a sense of calm I hadn't felt in years. The fire had taken my home. My family had turned its back. But what remained was something no one could block with a door. My ability to choose where I stood. And this time, I chose ground that would not ask me to prove my worth before letting me stay. The decision didn't come all at once. It settled quietly, the way truth often does when no one is arguing with it. I went back to the land 2 days later, alone this time. The morning was cool, the sky pale and open. I parked by the old fence line and stepped out, carrying nothing but a bottle of water and my phone. I walked the perimeter slowly, counted the posts, noted where the ground dipped and where it held firm. Years of habit guided my steps. Some knowledge doesn't burn away. I knelt and pressed my palm into the soil. It was dry on top, darker underneath, still alive. I stood there longer than I meant to, listening to the wind move through the grass. No traffic, no voices, just space. That afternoon, I made the call. "Yes," I said when he answered. "I want it." There was no celebration on the other end of the line, just a calm acknowledgement. "All right," he replied. "We'll take care of the rest." When I hung up, I didn't feel excitement. I felt steadiness. Back at the guest house, my phone buzzed again. This time it was my son-in-law. I almost didn't answer. "Almost. What are you trying to prove?" he said without greeting. His voice was sharp, impatient, the way people sound when control slips through their fingers. "I'm not trying to prove anything," I said. "You made us look bad," he snapped. "Do you have any idea what people are saying?" I thought of the doorway. The rug. The word homeless. "No," I replied. "And I don't care." There was a pause. Then his tone shifted, slightly. "Look, things got out of hand. We can move past this. Move past it." As if it were a misunderstanding. As if silence hadn't spoken clearly enough. "I've already moved," I said. "You're being dramatic," he said. "At your age, at my age," I repeated calmly, "I don't need permission to stand where I'm wanted." He didn't respond right away. I expect an apology, he said finally. I let the quiet stretch. You won't get one, I replied, and ended the call. That night, I slept without interruption. No calls, no messages, no one knocking on a door I no longer stood behind. The next morning, I met with a local contractor. Nothing fancy, just someone who knew land and didn't talk too much. We discussed clearing paths, reinforcing the small structure, bringing in water. You starting over? He asked casually. No, I said. I'm continuing. He nodded, like he understood the difference. As the days passed, I felt something shift in me. Not anger, not triumph, relief. I wasn't reacting anymore. I wasn't answering accusations or correcting narratives. I was simply doing what needed to be done. One evening, as the sun dipped low, my daughter sent a message. I don't recognize you anymore. I read it once. Then again, I typed back slowly. You never really looked. I set the phone down and watched the sky darken. Tomorrow would bring paperwork, decisions, work. But tonight, I stood on ground that didn't belong to anyone else's comfort. And for the first time since the fire, I felt like I was finally standing in my own life again. The paperwork moved faster than I expected. Not because anyone rushed it, but because nothing was being resisted. Titles, transfers, permits. The kind of things that stall when people argue, when they posture, when they try to win. None of that was happening here. By the end of the week, the land was no longer a possibility. It was mine. I stood at the edge of it early one morning, watching the sun lift itself slowly over the uneven ground. A contractor truck was parked near the fence. Tools clinked softly in the back as he unloaded them. No one asked me where to begin. They waited. I pointed once. There, I said. Clear a path first. He nodded and got to work. That afternoon, the man who helped me arrived again. He didn't bring papers this time. He brought a thermos and 2 cups. We sat on the tailgate of his truck and drank coffee while machines hummed in the distance. You're doing well, he said. Not as praise, but as observation. I'm doing what needs to be done, I replied. He smiled at that. Your daughter called me, he said after a moment. I didn't look at him. What did she want? To understand, he said. I told her the truth. I waited. That you re-raised me when no one else did, he continued. That you didn't ask for anything back. And that what you're building now has nothing to do with revenge. I nodded slowly. Did she believe you? He hesitated. I don't think belief is the issue. That night, my phone rang again. This time, it was my daughter. I answered. Her voice was different. Not sharp, not defensive, unsteady. He said you took him in, she said. That you fed him, helped him with school. Yes, I replied. You never told me. You were a child, I said. You didn't need to know. She was quiet for a long time. I didn't know you could do this, she said finally. Do what? Leave, she said. I thought about that, about how many times I had stayed when I shouldn't have. I didn't leave, I said. I moved forward. Her breath caught slightly on the other end. He feels like you humiliated him, she said. I pictured the doorway again. The blocked entrance. The rug. I didn't say his name, I replied. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't tell anyone what he did. But everyone knows, she said. Yes, I said. Because truth travels on its own. She didn't argue after that. The call ended without resolution. No apology. No reconciliation. Just an understanding that something permanent had shifted. As the days passed, the land began to change. Paths cleared, the old structure reinforced, water lines marked, slow, honest progress. One evening, I stood alone again at the center of it all, hands on my hips, watching the sky turn gold. I thought about how fragile power really is, how easily it disappears when the person it depends on stops bending. My son-in-law would continue to explain himself, to justify, to reframe. I wouldn't stop him. I had nothing left to explain. The fire had taken my past. The door had shown me the truth. And the ground beneath my feet had given me something better than permission. It had given me proof. Proof that dignity doesn't come from being included. It comes from knowing when to walk away and where to stand afterward. The first real confrontation didn't happen face to face. It happened quietly, through absence. My daughter stopped calling. Completely. No messages. No updates. No questions disguised as concern. The silence was deliberate this time, not accidental. I noticed it, and then I stopped waiting for it to end. Work on the land continued. Each day brought small changes. A cleared strip where I could walk without tripping, the structure reinforced enough to keep out wind, Water connected. Nothing impressive to look at yet, but everything functional. That mattered to me. One afternoon, a neighbor from a nearby property drove over. Older man. Slow movements. He leaned against his truck and watched for a while before speaking. Didn't think anyone was coming back after the fire, he said. I didn't either, I replied. He nodded. Takes nerve. I didn't correct him. Nerve had nothing to do with it. Staying would have taken more. That evening, I received a letter in the mail. Not an email. Not a text. A letter. My daughter's handwriting. She wrote about confusion, about pressure, about being caught between people. She didn't mention the rug. She didn't mention the door. She didn't apologize. She wrote that she hoped someday we could talk like before. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer. I didn't tear it up. I didn't respond. Some things don't need an answer right away. Some things need time to show whether they're sincere. Later that night, my phone rang again. An unfamiliar number. This is your insurance adjuster, a man said. We finalized the wildfire claim. I listened as he listed figures, numbers attached to things that no longer existed, structures, equipment, loss. When he finished, I thanked him and ended the call. I sat there afterward, letting the reality settle. I had lost a farm, but I had not lost my footing. The next morning, the man who helped me came by briefly. He didn't stay long, just checked in. They're starting to understand, he said. Who? I asked. Everyone who assumed you had nowhere else to stand. I watched a hawk circle above the field, slow and deliberate. They always do, I said. Eventually. He left shortly after. That afternoon, I stood near the edge of the property and looked out over the land that would become mine again in a different way. Not inherited, not borrowed, chosen. I thought about my son-in-law, about how small his world must be if a rug mattered more than a person, about how fragile his authority really was, built on comfort and silence. That authority no longer reached me. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger requires contact. I had stepped out of range. As the sun dipped low, I realized something else. The fire hadn't destroyed my farm. It had burned away every excuse I'd been using to stay where I wasn't valued. And what grew in its place wasn't revenge. It was ground. Solid. Quiet. Mine. The kind that doesn't need defending, only standing on. The invitation came through a third party. A short message from a mutual acquaintance. Polite, careful, neutral. They'd like to meet, it said. Just to talk. I read it once, then set the phone down. For a long time, talking had been the thing I did most. Talking things over. Talking things down. Talking myself into accepting what didn't sit right. Words had been my way of smoothing rough edges so others could stay comfortable. I wasn't sure I needed more words now. Still, I didn't refuse. The meeting was set for the following week, at a small cafe halfway between town and the new land. Public. Neutral ground. That felt intentional. I arrived early and chose a table near the window. I ordered tea and waited. They came together. My daughter first, then her husband a step behind. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically. In presence. The kind of man who draws strength from familiar surroundings had been taken out of his. They sat down without asking. No one spoke at first. I didn't think you'd come, my daughter said finally. I didn't think you'd ask, I replied. Her husband cleared his throat. This has gone far enough, he said. People are getting the wrong idea. I looked at him calmly. What idea is that? That we treated you badly, he said. I didn't answer right away. I took a sip of tea, let the silence stretch just long enough to be uncomfortable. You did, I said simply. Lackey shifted in his seat. You could have handled it differently. So could you? I replied. My daughter's eyes moved between us. He didn't mean it the way it sounded, she said. He was stressed. I nodded once. So was I. That was when something in the air changed. The excuses ran out of room. We want to put this behind us, her husband said. You can come stay with us for a while, until things settle. There it was. The offer that would have ended everything quietly. The one that would have restored appearances. Returned me to a place where I could be managed. No, I said. My daughter inhaled sharply. Why not? Because I don't want to, I replied. He leaned forward. You're being stubborn. I smiled faintly. I'm being clear. They both stared at me, as if waiting for something else. An explanation. A compromise. A softening. It didn't come. I didn't come here to argue, I said. I came to let you know something. I met my daughter's eyes. I love you, I said. But I won't stand in doorways where I'm unwelcome. Not again. Her husband opened his mouth, then closed it. For once, he had nothing ready. I'm building something of my own, I continued. I'm safe, I'm settled, and I won't be returning to old arrangements to make things easier for you. The words hung between us. When I stood up, neither of them tried to stop me. Outside, the air was cool, the sky open. I walked back to my car without looking back. As I drove away, I felt no triumph, no bitterness, just certainty. Some bridges don't collapse in fire or anger. They close quietly when one person finally stops crossing them alone. The first frost came early that year. I noticed it at dawn, a thin silver layer stretching across the ground, catching the light before the sun had time to warm it away. I stood on the porch of the small house we had finished just weeks before and breathed in the cold air. It felt clean, honest. This place didn't look like much from a distance. No long driveway, no polished door, no rug anyone needed to protect. But it held. I had learned to recognize that quality. The land had begun to respond to my presence. Paths were worn where I walked each morning. A few stubborn plants pushed up through soil that had been ignored for years. Progress was slow, but it was real. Nothing rushed, nothing borrowed. I liked it that way. Some evenings, I sat outside until the light faded completely. I listened to the wind, to the quiet movements of animals in the distance. I wasn't waiting for anything anymore. That was new. My daughter never called again after the cafe. Neither did her husband. I didn't chase the silence. I didn't fill it with messages meant to ease discomfort. I let it be what it was. Not everything broken needs fixing. One afternoon, as I stacked firewood near the shed, my phone buzzed. A message from the man who helped me, short and simple. Just checking in. I'm good, I typed back, and I meant it. He came by a few days later, unannounced, not to inspect, not to advise, just to sit for a while. We drank coffee on the steps and watched the sky change color. You know, he said, when I was a kid, I thought strength meant being loud, taking up space, making people listen. I smiled faintly. Most people do. I was wrong, he continued. You showed me that. I shook my head. I didn't show you anything. You already knew. You just remembered. He left before sunset. That night, I lit a small fire and sat close enough to feel its warmth without letting it crowd me. Flames can destroy. They can also keep you alive. It depends on where you stand. I thought about the door my son-in-law had blocked, about the word he used. Homeless. I understood now that he had been wrong in more ways than one. Home isn't where you're allowed to stay if you stay quiet enough. It isn't where your worth is measured against furniture or appearances or convenience. Home is where you are not asked to shrink. In the weeks that followed, I planted a few trees along the edge of the property. Nothing decorative, just strong ones. Roots that would go deep. Trees that wouldn't need explaining. As I pressed each sapling into the ground, I felt something settle inside me. A sense of completion I hadn't expected. The fire had taken my farm. The door had taken my illusions. But neither had taken my dignity. That I carried with me. Sometimes people ask if I miss my old life, if I regret how things ended. I tell them the truth. Some losses are endings. Others are instructions. I followed mine, and I built a home that didn't need defending, only standing in. Right here.